What are some less known, darker facts about beloved countries? New Zealand has one of the highest youth suicide rates in the OECD. I literally left NZ as a teenager in an act of change my life as drastically as possible, specifically so I wouldn't throw myself off a building. What is so bad in New Zealand, if you don't mind me asking? In addition to what others have said, New Zealand also has some of the highest rates of bullying, in school and in the workplace. Everyone talks about how nice Kiwis are. But in addition to the macho culture, and maybe along with it, there is this big, dark, ugly underbelly of widespread bullying. I can imagine that this very much contributes to high suicide rates. I am an immigrant and I've been living in NZ for more than 10 years. I also work as a nurse, and the amount of bullying and racism that takes place at work had been eye-opening. We discuss this on a weekly basis with my international colleagues, Nepalese, Indian, Filipino, and Pakistani, and we are so fed up with being treated as we're below them, Kiwi colleagues. We are dreaming of moving to Melbourne after 2 years. Not parent, but my opinion. I don't think there's any one specific thing you can point to explain this, but possibly one contributing factor is the macho hard man image that most young men feel obliged to project to their friends. No one really talks about depression and other feelings and crap that life is going to throw at you, and not surprisingly, the outcome is not great. But also the currentiveness of the younger generation. Locked out of the housing market, a pretty crap job market, major parts of the economy almost totally destroyed, tourism, hospitality etc., due to COVID, and facing having to pay of the most of the money that NZ has just spent, justifiably so, in helping the country through COVID. As someone who's been through the mental health system in NZ, one of our biggest issues, read this, emo, is that we essentially have a crisis point intervention only. As in, the system won't see you until you're a certain level of unwell, and then the system gets overloaded with incredibly unwell people, and not nearly enough resources, including trained/experienced professionals to help. So people either slip through, or cycle through the system without ever recovering, and occasionally do recover/a the help they need. Generally, there just isn't any community support, and the support that does exist tends to group all youth mental health issues as general young people stuff/puberty/a passing phase. My best friend tried to commit suicide. It was only after her accident that she was able to get referred to mental health support. They offered one group therapy session a month after her accident. I'd say access to help is a huge contributor to the suicide rates. The Dutch once ate their prime minister. Everyone's all eat the rich until they actually do it, shaking my head. A Nigerian cut my hair last week. I asked him about his country. He got mad and said if they could catch their president, they would tear him limb from limb and eat him alive. I won't be making small talk again with random people. Dude, you have no idea. There was a point where one of our politicians was in South Africa and some Nigerians found him. They beat the ever-living crap out of him on the streets. A more recent event was the Minister of Communications telling people they have to register their phone numbers with their national identity number, NIN, except majority of Nigerians don't have that and COVID is going on. That butthole said it was mandatory before the end of December, so thousands of people had to gather regardless of COVID protocols. Word on the street was if that dude left his house without police escorts, he wouldn't walk back without broken bones. Lol. This country is mad. I remember I was playing casual tennis with a bunch of people in Lagos. We would take turns and do a few rounds and then switch out, chatting while waiting for our next round. Fun, good atmosphere. A new guy showed up. We asked him what he does. He said, "I'm a politician." Whole vibe was gone. Original poster replies, "Excuse me, what the F?" When Johan de Witt, the Grand Pensionary, in effect, Prime Minister, of the Dutch Republic, was killed along with his brother in 1672, there are accounts of some among the mob taking parts of the bodies and eating them. Doesn't mob violence leave everyone a bit peckish? Shakes me to the bone. Ain't no skin off my back. Save the neck for me, Clark. There are two things in this world that I cannot stand. One is people who are intolerant of other people's cultures, and the Dutch. Spend your life wearing wooden shoes, you'd be an angry vagina as well. On Toronto's beaches up to the mid-1950s, it was common to see signs that read "No dogs or Jews allowed." Edit. Not so much of a spoiler alert, blacks were also in that group. My grandma was Irish and she remembers applying for jobs as a young woman in Australia. There would be signs saying "Help wanted, no Irish." I'm Irish and my parents have said they've seen signs like that even in the 80s. France had concentration camps. In 1936 for Spanish immigrants who fled the Civil War. They also had concentration camps in Algeria in the 1960s, and a weird bit of bureaucracy where they didn't call them camps. A lot of countries had concentration camps. But Germany was different because they had extermination camp. Canada had a cult leader named Rocaterio of Anthill Kids who did some very disturbing things to his followers and the children. Also, the podcast Cults had an episode on them, but they even left out the worst things they did. Edit. Rich to rock. Gang to kids. I'm told last podcast on the left did a 3-part series on him as well. Web link. Hell is too good for this guy. Holy effing crap. The guy who killed him in prison did the world a favor, but at the same time, I also wish Terrio suffered longer than died. That's wild that his cellmate killed him and then was like, "F ya, I did it." He's already got a life sentence, what does it matter at that point? I couldn't live with a guy like that. Spain created over 50 new torture methods in the past 300 years. How many from the Franco regime? Probably all of them. Probably it's a 50-50 between Franco and Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition ended in 1834 after lasting more than 300 years. Bhutan forcibly expelled Hindus in order to create its happy paradise. Yes. Uncle was working for UN during the whole Bhutanese refugee situation in Nepal. He said they were kicked out by the country. There is a large Bhutanese refugee community in Baltimore. Yup. And India and Nepal took them as refugees. Met many of these refugees, after resettlement by the IAM, in Australia. Their stories are painful to hear. If you've ever looked at a country like Liechtenstein on a map and wondered how a country that small can maintain a flourishing economy, the answer is that they're one of the largest offshore banking sites in the world. Most people only think of the Cayman Islands when it comes to offshore banking, but the Cayman Islands aren't even close to being the only place where rich people stash their money to avoid paying taxes on it. Most of the places that do it are territories and not countries. The Cook Islands, Anguilla, Jersey and Guernsey are a few other big offshore banking sites, but Liechtenstein has made it the core of their economy. Liechtenstein is primarily a banking-centric economy, but to be frank, they also have a decent manufacturing industry. They are known for making precision items that have low demand but require high quality. Things where price doesn't really matter to the buyer compared to quality. These include things such as dentistry and other surgical equipment, machining cutters, etc. It's the same in Switzerland. The place is full of tiny villages with world-leading manufacturing facilities. Even the US is used as a tax haven for a lot of non-Americans, as are a lot of other large countries for non-citizens that like to complain about traditional tax havens. Yes. I learned about Liechtenstein and a lot of other tax havens by working for a law firm that dealt with tax and estate management for the wealthy. Part of what we did also involved helping our clients choose which country to declare themselves a citizen of to get the best tax deal. The US is a popular choice. So is Nicaragua. Thanks for sharing, that's very interesting. Especially to hear that the US and Nicaragua are in that category together. If you don't mind, and are allowed to share, is there anything in particular the countries people choose to declare their citizenship as have in common? And did you guys ever help US or non-US citizens hide their money in the US? The common thread is that they offer low tax rates to wealthy people who declare citizenship there. That's actually why you'll hear about so many wealthy people living in Nicaragua. Liechtenstein is also basically just Switzerland Jr. During World War II, Japan used living POWs for bayonet practice. That's the most humane war crime they committed. What about the POW guard who famously had sex with the duck in front of the POWs? What the F? I'm sure you mean, what the duck? F the duck. Yep. Really went as evil as possible. It's worse than you think, you've been warned. Web link. The Japanese were worse than the Nazis in some ways. The difference is Germany knows their dark history and paid for it. Japan swept it all under the rug and never paid for or owned up to their war crimes. Edit. Don't forget about the systematic rape of Korean and Chinese women, and also turning them into comfort women. Double edit, just tagging on to say F China in its current form. Committing all the atrocities and horrors and much more that was done to them once. That's one of the tamest example of Japan's war crimes. Others include subjecting POWs to chemical and biological weapons, grenades, flamethrowers, syphilis, food and water deprivation, extreme temperatures and atmospheric conditions, forced pregnancy, or live dissection as part of the people of conquered populations. Forcing between 50,000 and 200,000 women to be raped. The kill all, loot all, burn all theme. Web link. You forgot about the fact that they literally infected entire Chinese villages with the plague and typhoid in order to find the best pathogens. They handed out snacks to villagers which were laced with paratyphoid. They also performed vivisections on American POWs, Chinese prisoners, which the American government forgave in exchange for the data from those experiments. All sorts of messed up. Edit, these were performed on Chinese prisoners. Sorry for my mistake. The US wanted to prevent the USSR from getting any good research, so they let the Japanese get away with it. Turns out there wasn't any good research, the Japanese just liked torturing people and pretended it was research. One of the areas the USSR has a legit effing issue with the US is the handling of the doctors and guards from Unit 731. A lot of research was conducted on Soviet citizens, so afterwards the Soviet government rightfully wanted to put those efforts on trial. Instead, the US shamefully shielded them so we could have their research. It's absolutely reprehensible. What's worse is many of those involved went on to have long normal lives without repercussion. I believe one even went on to serve for a long time as an elected official. Japan's war crimes were so horrible that the German troops would often give shelter to the persecuted people, and it's well documented. Do you realize how messed up you have to be to make Nazis sympathetic? Some of the worst atrocities of the Battle of Manila in 1945 involved Germans being raped and massacred by the Japanese. Most notably was the massacre at the German club in Manila. The Germans took in hundreds of refugees, believing that the Japanese would not dare attack citizens of their allies. It didn't matter. One of the very worst atrocities was perpetrated at the German club. Hundreds of Filipino refugees had gathered there. The Japanese piled up their belongings at the entrance, and after dousing them with gasoline, set them on fire. The head of the club tried to remonstrate but was pushed back in. Mothers with babies volunteered to go out and ask for mercy, but the babies were bayoneted and the women stripped and raped. A 13-year-old girl was gang raped by 20 Japanese, and then her breasts were cut off. Another teenage girl was sliced open with a bayonet after being raped and left in agony under the hot sun. A stray American shell later put her out of her misery. A houseboy, whose child had been bayoneted, rushed at the soldiers, was pinned with spears against the wall, and his sexual organs were cut off and stuffed into his mouth. While the fire raged and the orgy went on, the Japanese laughed and enjoyed it. The club head was Martin O'House, whose obituary states that he died clutching his German passport, with a swastika, to try and reason with the Japanese, but was killed with the rest. There are also other documented reports of Germans being massacred, such as more than a dozen German priests and nuns who offered shelter in a Catholic school. Then there was also the massacre at a Red Cross hospital where around a dozen German Jews were taking refuge. And Japan would help Jew to escape from the Nazis too. That's because the Japanese has no grudge towards the Jew, and the Nazi has no grudge towards Chinese. As a matter of fact, Nazi Germany actually trained Chiang Kai-shek's son, and he commanded a panzer unit during the 1938 Austrian Anschluss as a sergeant officer. Later he was promoted to lieutenant in the Nazi rank. Yeah, that was pretty tame compared to some stuff they did. Research a bit about the rape of Nanking/Nanjing. Or truly evil. Web link. During World War II, the Swiss National Bank accepted large quantities of gold from the German Reichsbank as payment for Swiss export shipments, weapons, ammunition. A large part of this Reichsbank gold had either been looted by the German occupying forces from the stocks of the occupied countries, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Poland, Czechoslovakia, etc., or it came from the victims of the Nazi persecution of the Jews, Holocaust. Not just stolen gold. Living Jews kept money in the banks, and those Jews still have active accounts that their families cannot gain access to because some banks are so old that they keep to 100-year-old traditions of needing owner authority to release the money. So what happens to the money if the owner is dead, such as in these cases? Money for the bank? In Canada, it goes to the government after 10 years, owner can still claim and get it though. Curious how it is for other countries. In all likelihood, they won't claim the money, but they still get to use those assets for loans and other stuff that will make the bank money. It's all part of that interest rate deal with banks. If you let them keep your money in a savings account, they use that money to fund loans and such, then they give you a share of the profits in the form of the agreed upon interest rate. So, effectively, that World War II gold is the bank's in all but name. Norway used to suppress the natives from up north by separating them from their parents and forcing Norwegian culture upon them. Learning Norwegian and how to live like a Norwegian. Crap, I guess everyone with a native population did that then. Apparently, I was here first was not acceptable. Technically, the Sami actually came into Scandinavia after the ancestors of Norwegians and Swedes were already living there. They settled away from the coast and further north where most of the other folks lived and assimilated to a degree, but retained their native languages. Full contact and cultural suppression took place when the Scandinavian states became more centralized in the medieval period, 2,000 years after the Sami settled. There was a movie about this happening in Sweden, too. Sami Blood. Definitely worth a watch. Australia did the same thing. Google the stolen generation. I feel like a lot of people outside of Australia, and a lot inside, don't understand or don't know about how terrible Aboriginals were treated even a few decades ago. It isn't exactly a picnic for them at the moment either. Similar to the Canadian residential school system. They took young native children, forced them to forget about their roots, and tried to implement white values. New Zealand too, we effectively banned our native language Te Reo in schools in the 1900s. Maori children were given corporal punishment for speaking it. Same in Canada. Also a lot of rape. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to be the first to know about Red Rabbit Reader's new videos. If you like our videos, please like them on YouTube and share them with your friends. We welcome your comments below. Press to start another of our videos.